in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm very excited to welcome McKensie Mack on as our next guest. They are the founder and CEO of MMG. McKensie, thank you so much for being here. If you could share a little bit about yourself, your pronouns, and how do you answer the question when you were younger? What do you want to be when you grow up?
Great question. So my full name is Bunny McKensie Mack. Most people call me McKensie Mack. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm originally from the south side of Chicago, so was born in South Shore, was raised between Roseland and Chatham neighborhoods in Chicago. And when I was younger, I wanted to be three things at once. I can remember very vividly saying that I wanted to be a journalist, a veterinarian, and a baker at the same time. So at that time, those were definitely my dreams. Don't ask me why, but but there's some sort of connection, I think, between the three. But that's what I envisioned myself doing when I became an adult.
I love that. A lot of talents happening at once.
Right, exactly.
Keeping the brain going. Fast forward to now, how do you think your personal journey has really led you up until this point to found MMG?
Wow, so great question also. So as a Black, queer, non-binary person, right, all of my aspirations currently are all informed by a desire to see my and our global society become anti-oppressive and be the most sort of just, the most just iteration of our lifetimes that we've ever experienced. And so I think that past experiences that I've had have really informed what I'm doing now, because a lot of what we do now is really about envisioning and imagining, how the world could be different, and then actually designing and developing what I like to call, specifically what I like to refer to as being disruption design, basically designing avenues for disrupting existing systems that are oppressive and inequitable, that are unjust, and then implementing those action plans across entire communities, organizations, foundations, with the help of a global network of researchers and strategists that really help us to make that possible.
I love that. I mean, that's an incredible mission as well in terms of creating spaces that are really anti-oppressive and kind of doing that systemic change. And I would say over the past 18 months to 2 years, a lot of organizations have said that they are ready to be anti-oppressive or anti-racist or really do the work, but sometimes they're not ready. How do you decide which folks that you work with are ready to truly identify social inequities at their workplace and really, sustain long-term change?
That's a great question. So I think that for me, I would answer that by saying that we typically in MMG, we don't make that decision, but our clients do.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really honest with them up front, and we say this is all what's involved, and we're not just talking about like a specific task and then checking the task off.
Right.
We're talking about like emotional labor and how far you're willing to go to actually really face and confront the ways in which you've internalized systems of injustice, the ways that you've internalized marginalization. And that will tell you if you're ready or not, and if you really want to make the commitment, which not all of us have to be ready, but we do have to be willing. And I think in that way, it's for us from the very beginning, helping our clients to understand that this is a partnership, this is a collaboration. We're not here to do the work for you. And we're not here to build codependency, we're here to build capacity, which means that we have to show you, have to model for you what this work is like, especially as informed by principles of racial and social justice. And then you actually have to take the baton and do it. So if you're looking for someone who's going to come in here and contribute to your performance of commitment, you're definitely in the wrong place.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the language you use in terms of capacity building, and nobody can do this work for you. It's a lot of self-reflection, asking yourself, even if you're not ready, but you're willing to, what actions are you going to take? How are you going to reframe your thinking? And everybody has different kind of, perspectives where they are in the world in terms of anti-oppressive kind of organizations too. And I know you've worked with global clients as well from the United States and UK, India, France, Germany, Spain, others. How do you start kind of thinking about localization and kind of global inclusion strategies when that looks different for kind of everyone depending on where they sit, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that for us, a really big part of that is recognizing that we, right, just like I talked about earlier about how we internalize systemic oppression. I think it's recognizing that as a Black person born in the US who does experience considerable oppressions and marginalizations based on my proximity to transness or my transness, my queerness, my Blackness, I still live in a country that has been founded on colonialism and imperialism. So that means that when we're doing work with researchers and strategists globally, that we need to create the kinds of systems and environments where they lead, where they tell us what they think is best, right? And they come in as advisors, but not as like not coming in as like as an attempt to sort of just listen to what we're doing, or we're coming in as an attempt to just say, hey, just listen to what we're doing, and then make decisions on what's best for your community based on what we think as people who don't have that cultural context. But instead, it's again like, how can we build a collaboration, a partnership where we know our cultural context very well, and we are very familiar with the ways in which we've experienced as historically marginalized people, the ways in which we've experienced oppression within the system and society. So we can talk to you about that all day, and the ways in which we develop action plans informed by that lived experience. And when we're doing work globally, it's how do we really turn the tides on the idea that it is the role of the white sort of cishet man from the US or from the UK or from Western Europe to come into a society in the majority world of the global South and to tell people this is what you need. How do we sort of go and get the resources and then bring those resources back to our people globally who understand and who share, you know, although very different and contextual and nuanced, who share a similar story of what it's like to be marginalized within a society.
Yeah, I think that reframing is really important, and also just thinking about it in a different way as well in terms of perspective and where you are from a cultural perspective, where you are from your kind of lived and learned experiences too, which we talk about a lot on this interview series too. I want to go back to kind of asking kind of folks in an organization how they're feeling in terms of a psychologically safe way, and kind of building that, you know, capability of asking for feedback too when people are making these kind of changes. How do you see really employee feedback or team feedback, and really ongoing employee listening really manifesting in organizations who are doing the work and they're committed?
Well, it's critical. It has to be like literally the foundation of any work that an organization is doing as it relates to racial and or social justice. It like absolutely has to be the foundation. And I'll say that within our processes, especially when we're doing climate assessments, when we're doing organizational research that focuses specifically on the state of the health of the culture of a tech company or a progressive organization or foundation, as an example, that we literally center and go out of our way at every single step to center the ideas, the reflections, the aspirations of those folks that make the existence of that entity possible, which is the folks that do most of the labor.
Mm-hmm.
For us, making sure that is included every single step is really important to us. And we find that with our clients, they tend to be pretty surprised by that. They're like, wait, we're doing another CDM, which is what we refer to as a collaborative decision-making process. Like, we're doing another one. It's like, yeah, because we have another big decision to make. So it's not you just ask people for their input once, and then we just make a lot of decisions, and then we never talk to them again. It's how do we continue to talk to them? And then also, what do we have to give to them in return? So we're not creating a research process that is extractive, or we want all this emotional labor, but then those folks that are participating and giving of that labor are not really receiving anything back.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk more about what you mentioned in terms of collaborative decision making process?
Yeah, sure. So it's a process that actually is informed by a number of the readings and research that we've done on expressions of Black trans feminism.
Mm-hmm.
And so specifically, it means that when we're making decisions, we actually don't make decisions based on consensus, because we know that within a number of organizations, especially Fortune 500 companies, right? Companies that are making, are into the 8 figures and over and above, who are making that kind of money, they tend to be white dominant. And even the smaller companies, right, that tend to be white dominant, because that's our conditioning, is companies are built by white people, and white people tell us what to do, and they make the rules, and we listen. And especially when we add in cisness and we add in heterosexuality and we add in being non-disabled, these are all categories of people that we have been conditioned to position into position into leadership roles and to listen to, while putting ourselves, or like seeing that we're on the margins and thinking that that's something that's acceptable or that's something that's normal or okay. So within a CDM process, it's actually not focused on building consensus, but it's much like qualitative research when you do interviews, where what you're looking for is patterns. So you're not saying, hey, if I interview 30 people and 29 people do not say the same thing, that they're experiencing harm the same ways, then it's not worth reporting on. But instead you say, if I lead, for example, 10 focus groups, and four of those focus groups, there are white people that say, I really don't think that we have an issue with race. I really don't think we have an issue with ableism. We're fine. We're in a great place. And then in five other sort of interviews, there are folks that raise, hey, like as a disabled person, I experienced so much ableism within this community, within this society, within this organization. As a South Asian person, I experienced so much anti-Asian racism. This is definitely a big issue. For us, when we look across those focus groups or those small group sessions, we see a pattern. And the pattern is that there are two organizations within this, there are two cultures within this organization. One that refuses to accept the issues that exist, and also is made up of people who don't know what the issues are because they don't experience them on a regular basis. And the other are folks that are forced to have a high level of awareness to survive within the society, which is also the same level of awareness and emotional labor that they have to extend within the community and within the company to thrive. And in many cases, often just to survive and not even thrive. So for us, that would mean within a CDM process, okay, what people are saying, and what some people who don't know what they're saying is they need education
Yeah.
because there is an issue here, but they don't know it. And then for those folks who know what the problem is, another pattern is being frequently asked to weigh in and to offer emotional labor, but not really receiving anything in return, even though on a regular basis, they're often being tapped to offer their lived experiences or to share their traumas. But then nothing happens. People know that the harm is happening, but they don't do anything to change it. So within a process like that, it helps us to basically what I like to analogize it as is basically like cooking a consomme soup, where you put all these vegetables and all this sort of gunk, is what I like to call it, into a pot, and you let it boil to the top, and then you strain it out. So it's what is the sort of purification process that we're developing. And as we're developing that process, how do we think about the very specific intersections of people's identities, so, and develop a sort of a plan for implementation so that those folks actually receive something in return and they're not just being pulled into a process just because.
Mhm. I think that emotional labor piece that you brought up too is really important too, and not over relying on a very kind of most likely few number of employees to also educate on an individual basis and also treat it like it is, you're getting executive leadership time and all these things. You need to actually take action and also listen, and actively listen and take action on this feedback as well. And when you're talking about data too, it's getting beneath the surface of what showing too. If you're holding all these focus groups, which is great, but we are not fans of box checkers here as
Yeah.
well. you have to do the work underneath it. Um, and there are myths around kind of equity work and anti-oppression work that I'm sure that you're constantly debunking and working with a variety of leaders and companies with. But is there one that you kind of want to highlight that people still hold up that you'd like to just break and not talk about anymore?
Yeah, I think one is that training alone is enough. That, if you build it, people will come. And it's like, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you build it and people drive by and they're like, oh, that's a nice building.
Yeah.
But they, like the building awareness that it exists isn't enough to have people actually show up in the space or come into the room or open the door. And so I think that's one of the bigger myths is sometimes people think, oh, well, if we just provide the education, then that will lead to a shift in our culture. And that means people's behavior will change. But that's almost like, I like to liken it to what I know companies prioritize, which is accounting, right? And revenue, and the ways in which companies make money, or if it's a foundation or a nonprofit, the ways in which companies are raising funds, right? The ways in which they are making decisions about how money is going to be spent. And you wouldn't just say, hey, we really want to be sure that we have a great accounting system here. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide people across the organization with an accounting workshop, and then we're just going to assume that they're just going to make right decisions, and people are going to be paying appropriately, and people can just pay themselves, and they're going to be, it's on the honor system, it'll be great. And we would never do that with money. So why do we do that with people?
Mhm.
I think that's one of the big mythologies, is that it takes singular action, and the singular action is enough, and we can just expect people to change. But actually, it requires a high level of coaching and consistency and communications and resources. And then also underpinning that with actual policies and structures and systems for accountability. So that as a company continues to grow or evolve and change, people come, people leave, then that sort of those new norms that are being developed are something that are built into the structure of the organization, as opposed to it being some sort of a one-off in a past era or in a past sort of moment in the history of an organization. It becomes actually something that's a living and breathing thing that continues to last and exist.
Yeah, if they're saying that this anti-oppression work is a priority, then they need to give it time, money, and resources
Right.
as well, outside of just training and maybe using that as one lever of the strategy. But also, it is not the end all be all saying, okay, we're not an oppressive organization anymore. Oftentimes, too, people who are doing this work, and we're talking on, on this podcast, we talk about ROI and KPIs, and a lot of times over metricizing this equity work does come up. Do you have kind of advice for how a company can measure progress, but also not rely on metrics to say, okay, we had these 4 trainings, we hired this many people from an underrepresented group, so we're doing a good job?
I would say that tokenism is not your friend,
Yep.
right? So like, and this happens to me often. I'll get on a call with a person of color that's been hired, let's say within business development department, or they've been hired within HR, and they're making anti-Black comments, and they don't know what they're saying is anti-Black, or they don't know what they're saying potentially might be anti-Asian, or might be right, some sort of a white supremacist ideology that I'm sure is something they've heard many, many times, and have never had an opportunity to question or challenge, or have, and really do believe that it's true. And I think in terms of thinking about progress, according to we hired this many people of color, it's like if you hire 100 people of color to come into an organization, and let's say you have 100 people, and you're like, wow, well now we have 100 people of color, we have 100 white people. Like, come on, we have parity here in terms of race. If you're bringing folks into a toxic environment, you're just bringing 100 more people into a space to be harassed and to be treated poorly.
Mhm.
So it has to actually be a cultural shift. Like the actual culture has to change, you know? It's
Mhm.
like if you take medicine, I can go out and I can get 100 medicine bottles that potentially I need, and it might be life saving for me. But if I just have them in a cupboard and I'm not taking them, what's the point? So, in thinking through actually hiring folks of color, right, actual human beings to come and work within an organization, if they don't actually have decision making power, if they're not put into positions of leadership to actually be able to lead, if they're not being chosen based on their actual qualifications, based on their actual knowledge base and their values, but just sort of like you're looking for a brown face in the place, then you're absolutely going in the wrong direction. Because more than likely, what's going to happen is you're going to hire and bring in more folks of color that will uphold a white dominant culture and structure, because that's what they've been taught to do in order to survive, but that are not really being equipped with the tools to be able to identify when that culture is toxic, when it's harmful, when things are happening that are unacceptable, and then also being given, you know, the organizational power to be able to intervene, not on their own, but in collaboration with other sort of leaders and folks within the organization that have that decision making power.
It's just definitely an ongoing process, and we always talk about too as well in terms of hiring, retaining, promoting, creating, cultivating that culture, leadership opportunities, and impact on the business, decision making power. It's all part of the strategy here as well for kind of that sustained commitment to. In terms of kind of you and your work, I'm sure there's never a dull moment, never a slow day. What's the next problem or situation you're trying to solve? What's taking up the most brain space in McKenzie's mind?
Ooh, how to equip people with the tools they need to confront harm and seek repair probably is one of those things that takes up the most space. And I'll say that outside of our work with MMG, but then it also informs the work that we do at MMG, is I'm a transformative justice facilitator in my community on the south side of Chicago.
Mhm.
And for me, thinking about how we, have been sort of thrust into the world with absolutely zero knowledge of what harm is and what repair can be, and how the ways in which healing justice can be integrated into our communities, not just our workplaces, but into our communities as a whole, is something that continues um, to bother me, and is something that continues to be a high priority in the work that we do. Is how do we equip people with the tools so they know how to do this, and then also how do we help organizations to basically develop systems so they're hiring the right people, and right meaning the people that actually are willing to do that work and to learn if they don't know, who are humble enough and are willing to be vulnerable enough to admit when they make mistakes, as opposed to being quick to be defensive about the mistakes that they make, which wastes time,
Mhm.
but actually to own it and take ownership over it, to hold their own bags, and then to grow from it and become better people.
Have you seen whether it's positive or negative in the over kind of a decade of, work that you've done in equity and inclusion work, kind of trends, or like what gives you hope, or what do we still need to work on in terms of this work?
One thing that gives me hope is maybe about 6 years ago, I started calling myself an anti-oppression consultant.
Mhm.
And I know there were a lot of folks who told me at that time, like, don't call yourself that. And I'm like, why? And they said, because it's so negative. You're never going to get work if you do that. But they're talking to like an Aries sun, Taurus rising, Capricorn moon, which for those folks that might be into astrology, like that means you're a very bullheaded person. So at the time, I'm like, I don't care. This is like what I want to be really explicit. This is what my work is about. This is what I'm focused on. And I'll say over the past year and a half, maybe I'll say, yeah, over the past year and a half, I've seen more and more folks say, yes, I do anti-oppression work. And this is what that entails for me. And this is what my process is. And this is what my theory of change is, very publicly and very unabashedly across social media and meetings, and calls with prospective clients, et cetera. And for me, that gives me hope, because I know that when you're so beaten down within a society, it can be easy over time to just say, I'm going to just take the road that is most traveled. I'm going to keep my head down, and I'm going to do my very best not to say or do anything that makes people feel uncomfortable, or that has people feeling intimidated by me, or has people feeling uncomfortable, because that I'm going to want to correct my words and not say it makes people uncomfortable. But I think that as we're experiencing more of the ways in which this society is failing us, is working for those with the most privilege and continuing to fail the folks, which is really the majority of the people in this world, who hold the least societal privilege. I think that a lot of those pleasantries are going away, as they should.
Mhm.
And I think that what's ending up themselves, but then also looking to a number of the Black and Brown organizers, right, who are not here anymore, and those that are here, who are really guiding and paving the way to having us imagine the world in a way that is far more radical, and that really pushes the envelope, as opposed to saying, let's just do a little bit now, a little bit here, a little bit here. They're like, well, if we have the privilege and we have the power to do a lot now, why not just do a lot now? And that gives me hope.
That's a great answer. And I think people leaning into this work, asking for your also guidance as well, and wanting to make this commitment is hopeful for the future. Is there a favorite? I'm sure there are many, but like a recent success story at MMG that you'd like to share? You don't have to name the company, or you kind of, if you would like to, or a leader, but just wanted to ask.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I won't name the company, but I'll say that we led a research process within a big organization, and it took us about a year. And we're talking about, probably across all the folks that were involved, probably about over 800 hours of labor that was spent into conducting this project, into doing the data gathering, the data reporting, into leading out the coaching, into like leading out an education plan, a comprehensive education plan to try to teach people how to be organizers within their organization, within their communities. And at the end of it, the executive leadership team read the report and were like, we're not releasing this, because this is just like, I'll paraphrase what they really were actually saying. This is too honest. This is like, does not put us in the most favorable light. Like, this is just like, this is not positive. This is not according to our brand, right? All that. And there might be some folks listening to this podcast, once it airs, who'll wonder, well, why are you naming that as like a good experience? And I'll say it because within our work, we had such a meaningful impact on the people that we work with throughout the project, including the folks who started off by saying, hey, the following things that you're naming, they're not possible. And then 6 months to a year later, we're like, I can't believe that all the work that we've done in an environment where there was so much, there was so much sort of like counter organizing to our work and to our labor and to our movement building. And yet we still accomplished so much. And I've learned so much about myself in the process. And I'm going to take that on to the things that I do next, because now I believe that I can do even bigger and better things than what I'm doing now. And that, I think, was a major success story, which means in our work for us at MMG, and then also for me as an individual, I think it's important to be reminded that sometimes, we do get a revolution. We don't always get the revolution that we want. And we often wish that we could run across the finish line and be the person that starts the race and the person that finishes it. But more often than not, our role is to pass the baton. And
Mhm.
if we can do that successfully, that's probably one of the best things that we could ever do in the work that we're doing and ways in which we're leading, not just within organizations, but also within our communities.
And empowering others and motivating them to also take the baton and move forward with this work, and also ask themselves internal questions about why this is the current state and how folks feel at the organization too. I think that is sustainable change as well, empowering others. So when you kind of leave your work with them as well, they're thinking about this. McKensie, is there anything else that I either didn't ask that you would like to share, or maybe, 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope listeners bring with them today?
Yeah, I think I want to share one last thing is that um, for me, and I have calls with folks within orgs all the time, one-on-ones where I'm offering them support and as many resources as possible. Even showing up to them with calls too, and just saying, hey, I'm going to back you. I'm going to show up with you on this call, and then I'm going to let you say something, and then I'm going to also go into my diatribe as well. But depending on what's happening, the word empower, I like to remind folks that you already have the power within you.
Mhm.
I want to support you. I want to speak affirmation and validation into you so that you can recognize the power that you hold, and then you can act on it. But you have that. And so what does it mean? What does the process look like to identify it? And then how can I sort of affirm you, validate you, show up and support you in active and practical ways and actionable ways that help you to be able to find your laurels and figure out, what it's going to mean for you to be able to engage in this work in a way that's as iterative as possible, that's as vulnerable as possible, that is as open and honest as possible, and that not only is about freeing other people, but is also about freeing yourself.
Absolutely. It definitely starts with that inner work. You have the power. You need to have the willingness and kind of openness and vulnerability, and also empathy there as well to continue forward, and lift others up as well. McKensie, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was lovely.